I will occasionally introduce a song by saying that the hero or heroine died of folk song disease. This mysterious illness is the scourge of lovers who can die in a single night from a broken heart or from remorse. It's the fate of both characters in the most widely collected English language song. This is a song that can be found right across the British Isles and the United States, and sometimes in Australia. It's been recorded by artists as diverse as Dolly Parton, Ewan MacColl, the Everly Brothers, and the classical countertenor Andreas Scholl. This song has been in fashion for at least 350 years, and it's easy to see why. It's a timeless, powerful story of love, jealousy, betrayal, and death. And its name is Barbara Allen. In Scarlet Town, where I was born, there was a fair maid dwelling, made every youth cry well-a-day. Her name was Barbara Allen. All in the merry month of May, when green buds they were swelling, young Jimmy Grove on his deathbed lay, for love of Barbara Allen. Today we're on the trail of the most sung about woman in the English-speaking world. Her story will take us on a journey from the London stage to just about every town in England and Scotland. As we trace her roots, we'll travel to the remote regions of Transylvania and the furthest reaches of the Appalachian Mountains. We'll visit King Arthur's court and find ourselves facing down the gods in ancient Greece. There's also been a personal journey in this for me, and that's the quest to track down a particular version of Barbara Allen. In and among all the many versions, I couldn't seem to find the one I learned as a child, the one I still know how to sing and play. Through this journey, I've managed to uncover its origins, and I'll tell you more about that later. But first, let's start with the oldest written reference to the song, and it is quite an old one. For this, we have to revisit our friend Samuel Pepys. Only this time he's not collecting ballads, but recording with delight his time at a New Year's party in 1666, just 9 months before the Great Fire of London. He writes about his dear Mrs. Nip singing her little Scotch song of Barbary Allen. In the common parlance of the day, Scotch didn't necessarily mean Scottish. It could have meant northern or simply rustic. And Pepys' delight may have been more about the singer than the song. Elizabeth Nip, or Nep, was a professional actor and singer on the London stage. A celebrity of her day, she'd recently met Pepys, and he had invited her to a musical evening with his friends. Later that same night, he escorted her home in a carriage, where she sat on his knee, and in his own words, he played with her breasts and sung. Maybe they sang Barbara Allen together. At any rate, it was the start of several years' flirtatious friendship between the two. We don't have a copy of this early version of Barbara Allen, and there are some doubts as to where it came from. Was it already in the folk tradition, or was it a song written especially for the stage, which was once again flourishing under the theatre-loving Charles II after a long ban under Cromwell? The drama of the song and its strong narrative do suggest a theatrical origin, but on the other hand, its description as a Scotch song implies a more traditional origin. There is even a theory that this was a satirical song about the king's relationship with Barbara Villiers, which is the sort of caper that the fun-loving Pepys would certainly have enjoyed. It's true that Barbara and the king had recently gone through a cooling of their relationship, but he gifted her a castle in 1670, so it can't have been too bad. Both seem to have got what they wanted from the long-standing liaison, and neither of them were ever in any real danger of dying for love. In fact, the twice-married Barbara Villiers lived on into her late 60s. But let's get back to our Barbara. Her tale appears in print for the first time about 30 or 40 years later. The title of the song is given as Barbara Allen's Cruelty, or The Young Man's Tragedy, with Barbara Allen's lamentation for her unkindness to her lover and herself. This version, which comes from the Roxburgh collection, is very familiar to those of us who know the song today. He sent his man unto her then, to the town where she was dwelling. You must come to my master dear, if your name be Barbara Allen. For death is printed in his face, and sorrows in him dwelling. And you must come to my master dear, if your name be Barbara Allen. The drama takes place in Scarlet Town, which might be a pun on Reading, as some have suggested, or it could just be the 17th century version of Blanktown. Singers can easily adapt it to their local town, and we can see many examples of this being done in collected versions. Barbara Allen has a wandering nature, as we'll shortly see, and over the following years both England and Scotland were keen to claim it as their own. It's not clear to this day exactly where the song originated, but in the mid-18th century we begin to see two distinct versions of the song in circulation. Ballad collecting was just starting to become popular, and there was a growing cultural tendency to romanticise folk songs as being pure and unaffected, and in some cases to try and establish an ancient, unbroken line of oral tradition for them. Barbara Allen appeared in two collections around this time. In 1740, a version was included in a book of Scottish songs called The Tea Table Miscellany by the Scottish poet Alan Ramsay. This version starts not in May, at the start of summer, but around Martinmas, also known as Old Halloween, the start of winter. It introduces Sir John Graham as Barbara's lover, a recognisably Scottish name. Oh, hurly, hurly, rose she up, and slowly she gaed to him. And when she came to his bedside, young man, I think you're dying. It's I am sick and very sick, and it's all for Bobby Allen. It's better for me, it'll never be for bonny Bobby Allen. 25 years later, Thomas Pearse, an Irish bishop and enthusiastic ballad collector, included two versions of the song in the book Relics of Ancient English Poetry. The basis of Pearse's book was a manuscript that he's said to have rescued from a friend's house in Shropshire, where the housemaid was using its pages to light the fire. Pearse also added material from the Pepys collection, songs from Shakespeare's work, and added some more recent ballads to his collection. Pearse presents two versions of the song. Sir John Graham and Barbara Allen, a Scottish version, is said to be a transcription of a written version with some conjectural emendations. In fact, it seems to be Ramsay's version with an extra helping of Scots dialect, which verges on parody at times. The second version is given with some corrections from an old black letter copy entitled Barbara Allen's Cruelty, or The Young Man's Tragedy. This black letter copy, in other words, a version in Gothic typeface, is almost certainly the Roxburgh version. They follow exactly the same structure and with much wording in common. However, Pearse's corrections give us the familiar green buds they were swelling, and names the young man as Jemmy Groves. He also adds a final verse. Barbara's dying warning to other women to avoid her fault and therefore her fate. We don't know whether these corrections have come from the oral tradition or are the work of an enthusiastic editor who wanted to improve the song. Such things were known to happen. Just over 100 years later, Francis James Child classified these two versions as distinct variants of the song, with some considering them to be English and Scottish versions. The Scottish version later took on a further dimension with the addition of gifts or bequests given to Barbara Allen by the dying man. These include a watch and the more legend-like heart's blood on his shirt or a bowl of his tears. The blooded shirt hints that the young man may have hastened his own death. Oh, look at my red head, he cried, and there you'll find it ticking. My gold watch and my gold chain I leave to Barbary Ellen. Look at my bare foot, he cried, and there you'll see them lying. Bloody sheets and bloody shirts, I've sweated for you, Ellen. The poet and classicist Robert Graves came to believe that Barbara must be a witch. Drawing on the Scottish version, he says, "It is clear enough that Sir John Graham did not die merely of a broken heart. He seems to have been a landowner who had an affair with a country girl, but later decided to marry a woman of his own class. When this marriage was announced, the girl avenged herself by bewitching him, the procedure being to model a wax image of the victim, make it more real by adding his own stolen hair trimmings and nail parings, and then gradually waste it over a candle, sticking pins into parts that the witch wanted to injure most." On the other hand, throughout the ages, the word witch has been used as a slur on powerful or transgressive women. Writing in the 1950s, Robert Graves may not have seen things in the same way that we do now. Martin Carthy draws on the meaning of the name Barbara, barbarian or foreigner, and suggests that she was a gypsy or a woman of African origin. This gives a whole different perspective on the song. A similar but distinct ballad, The Bonnie Brown Girl, makes this theme more explicit still. The brown girl is jilted because she is brown, and yet her suitor regrets his choice and is dying for love of her. She shows no remorse about his impending death, refuses to become his mistress, and escapes the ballad with her life. As far as the young man and his parents were concerned, the brown girl's dark skin marked her out as inferior. Whether her darkness came from her race, or simply because as a working-class woman she laboured outdoors, we can't know. Either way, a dark Barbara's anger at being slighted is much easier to understand. Do you remember in Scarlet Town, in yonder tavern drinking, you gave a hand to the ladies all, but you slighted Barbara alive. He turned his face onto the wall. She turned her back upon him. Adieu, adieu to all my friends. Be kind to Barbara. Barbara Allen is very popular in the United States, and it's been recorded frequently by mainstream artists. There, she's often known as Barbary Allen or Barbary Ellen. We know so much about the song in the US from a master's thesis written in the 1950s by a nun, an English teacher from Ohio, Sister Mary Athanasius Riley. The earliest printed version of Barbara Allen in the States is from 1836, but Sister Mary presents a number of sources that suggest it was already well in circulation in colonial times. Through analysis of the different American versions of the song, she also claims that it must have spread through oral tradition as well as printed versions. It may have come over with the Ulster Scots. It's widely popular in the southern mountains, and there are multiple versions to be found there. Another educationalist played an even more important role in the history of Barbara Allen and is credited with saving Appalachian musical culture for posterity. In 1908, Olive Dame Campbell travelled with her husband John from their native Massachusetts to the mountains of Kentucky to make a study of Appalachian culture. They were there with a view to reforming the school system, but Olive was about to find her true passion as a song collector and folklorist. At the start of their trip, the couple spent an evening listening to children singing local songs around the fire, songs that had been passed on through their families for many generations. Olive was struck at once by the unusual modes and rhythms of the melodies. Barbara Allen was the song that intrigued her most. She'd learnt it as a child, but the version she knew was nothing like this. Throughout the rest of her trip, she pursued and did her best to collect as much of the local music as she could. Later, in 1916, she finally persuaded Cecil Sharp to visit the region, securing the preservation of many of the Appalachian mountain ballads. Together, they published a collection called English Folk Ballads of the Southern Appalachian Mountains. After the death of her husband, Olive Dame Campbell went on to found a Scandinavian-style folk school in Brasstown, North Carolina, and she continued to collect local music and other folk arts until her death in 1954. The John C. Campbell Folk School still promotes and celebrates Appalachian arts and crafts to this day. It's not unusual for Barbara Allen to elicit a highly emotional response in the United States. It's been described to collectors as a dwelling song or a hurting song. And there's often the sense, as Olive Dame Campbell found, that it's something special. Writing in 1915, Professor James Raines said, "Certainly no one who has ever heard this old song sung by women battling their clothes before lonely cabins, or by flatboatmen under the blazing sun on the forks of the Kentucky River, can ever forget the profound impression of almost magic melancholy it produces." In 1927, he simply said, "It has sung itself with plaintive sweetness into the hearts of many generations." As she was going across the fields, she heard those death bells knelling, and every stroke the death bell gave, hard-hearted Barbary Ellen. Oh, mother, mother, make my bed, go make it long and narrow. Young William's died for me tonight, I'll die for him tomorrow. In many versions of the song, and especially those from the southern mountains, the tragic death of the lovers is not the end of the story. After their deaths, they are buried separately, but a red rose grows out of her grave and a green briar from his. As they grow, the rose and the briar intertwine, so that the lovers, separated in life, are united in death. This ending is not found in any of the earlier versions, but is common in the Appalachian tradition. It's likely been transplanted from another ballad, Fair Margaret and Sweet William, at some time in the past, and it's taken root, so to speak. Known in folklore circles as the motif of the chapel flowers, this is a very old story indeed. And we're all about following the story on this podcast, so we are definitely going to go there.
Sweet William was buried in the new churchyard, and Barbary in the old one. From the new churchyard sprang a rosy bush, from the old one sprung a green briar. They grew and they grew and they grew so tall, till they could not grow any higher. They leaned and they formed in a true love knot, the rose around the briar.
The Chapel Flowers is a way to have an undeniably tragic tale, but still come to a resolution, albeit a bittersweet one. Though the lovers were parted in life, by their own actions or those of others, they were always fated to be together. Even death is not a barrier to their strength of their love, and from beyond the grave, they are united forever. This ending can be found in one of the oldest ballads in Hungary, Kadar Kota, or Kate Kadar. Common in Transylvania, it tells the story of a rich young man called Martin who wants to marry the daughter of a serf, Kate. Martin's mother disowns him, and unbeknownst to him drowns Kate in a lake. Martin goes to the lake to speak with Kate's ghost and is drowned himself. After they're buried, the rose grows from Martin's grave and the briar from Kate's. But there is one more twist. The mother brings down a curse upon her head by tearing up the flowers. The same motif can be found in a much older story, the tale of Tristan and Isolde. There are many versions of this story dating back to the Dark Ages, and as Sir Tristan, he eventually became one of King Arthur's knights. Although the details vary, Tristan and Isolde are always locked in a forbidden love. Through separations and marriages to other people, their love remains strong, in many versions due to them drinking a powerful love potion. Such love could not be quenched and eventually leads to their deaths. They were buried in Cornwall, where a red rose grew from her grave and a vine from his. The vine wrapped itself around the rose, growing back each time it was cut. The tale of Tristan and Isolde is another wandering story, and it's a hurting story. So perhaps it's not surprising that eventually it found Barbara Allen and wrapped itself around her like a vine. But there's an even older version of this motif, which is 2,000 years old. It's found in Ovid's Metamorphoses. The gods Jupiter and Mercury visited a town in Phrygia, but the townsfolk closed their doors against them. A poor couple, Baucis and Philemon, opened their house to the two gods and gave them food and wine. To punish the other townsfolk, Jupiter and Mercury destroyed the town with a flood, but Baucis and Philemon were saved. The two gods asked the couple what they would like as their reward. We ask to be priests and watch over your temple. And since we have lived out harmonious years together, let the same hour take the two of us, so that I never have to see my wife's grave, nor she have to bury me. The god's assurance followed the prayer. They had charge of the temple while they lived. And when they were released by old age and by the years, as they chanced to be standing by the sacred steps discussing the subject of their deaths, Baucis saw Philemon put out leaves, and old Philemon saw Baucis put out leaves. And as the tops of the trees grew over their two faces, they exchanged words while they still could, saying in the same breath, "Farewell, O dear companion," as in the same breath the bark covered them, concealing their mouths. The people of Bithynia still show the neighbouring trees there that sprang from their two bodies. Trustworthy old men related these things to me. For my part, I saw garlands hanging from the branches, and placing fresh ones there, said, "Let those who love the gods become gods. Let those who have honoured them be honoured." In many ways, Barbara Allen sits neatly in Restoration England. It was a time of change, and the place of women in society was altering radically. Previously, women had been seen as unquestionably inferior to men and entirely different from them, almost to the point of being considered a different species. The woman's realm was the home, ruled by husband or father, and her role model the Virgin Mary, a chaste, gentle mother. However, by Pepys' time, a more positive view of women was starting to emerge. So-called female virtues were named and celebrated alongside very different virtues assigned to men. And for the first time, women were allowed to act on the stage, appearing as public figures and achieving financial independence. This wasn't without its critics and controversy, as you might imagine. Barbara Allen is a woman with agency. She comes when she's summoned, but she goes alone at her own pace, and she doesn't give in to the man's wishes. Her lover suffers the ultimate penalty because of her actions, and so does she. And yet, there's something universal about her too. She fits easily into any setting, whether a remote cabin in the Ozarks, a Scottish village, or Scarlet Town, wherever that might be. Star-crossed lovers is a perennial theme, and Barbara Allen its archetype. Beyond time, beyond death, beyond the grave, the love between Barbara and her young man will endure. And what of my Barbara, the one I learned all those years ago? Well, I did eventually track her down through its Scottish lineage. In Ewan MacColl's version, I heard something similar to the version that I knew, and prompted by the search, the memories came flooding back. My dad learned to play it from a book. He used to play it to me when I was a little girl. And I learnt it from the same book. It was the first song that I learned to fingerpick, even though my fingers were a little bit too small for it. Dad is still around, but the book is long gone. But I did eventually trace it. It was called Saturday Night, 20 Tabulated Folk Songs for Guitar by John Pearse, who was an enthusiastic guitar teacher working with the BBC. It said he taught a whole generation how to play the guitar, and he certainly helped me as well. And it turns out he was born just up the road from my original hometown, so it's a very small world. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but thank you for the song, John.
It was round and about last Martinmas time, when green buds they were swelling, that young Jimmy Grove of the West Country fell in love with Barbara Allen. He sent the place where she was dwelling. The master bids you come around if your name be Barbara Allen. So slowly, slowly she came by, and slowly she came nigh him. And all she said when she came, young man, I think you are dying. If on your deathbed you do lie, what needs the tale you're telling? I cannot keep you from your death. Oh, my name is Barbara Allen. Don't you mind, young man, she said, when in the tavern calling. You made the toast to go round and around, but you slighted Barbara Allen, and death was printed on his face, and all his heart was stealing, and all he cried out as she left, hard-hearted Barbara Allen. As she was going over the field, she heard the death bell tolling, and every sound that the death bell rang, hard-hearted Barbara Allen. Oh, mother, mother, make my bed, oh, make it soft and narrow, for Jim